The fever came on the second day out from Monticello, Utah, and by the third morning, Faith Zimmerman could barely sit upright in the wagon. Her sister Margaret kept glancing back at her with worry creasing her face, but their father drove the team forward without slowing. The wagon train had a schedule to keep, and Independence, Missouri was still weeks away. 23 families were making this journey east together, leaving behind the harsh Utah territory for what they hoped would be better opportunities back in civilized country. Faith understood the logic even as her body burned and her throat felt like she had swallowed desert sand. One sick girl could not hold up an entire wagon train. "Daddy, she's getting worse," Margaret said, her voice carrying back to where Faith lay among the trunks and supplies. "We will see how she fares tonight," Thomas Zimmerman replied, his tone brooking no argument. But that night, Faith could not stand without her legs giving out beneath her. Her father felt her forehead and pulled his hand back quickly as if the heat of her skin had burned him. The other families gathered around their campfire, voices low and urgent. Faith heard fragments of their discussion through the canvas of the wagon where she lay shivering despite the warmth of the September evening. "Cannot risk the fever spreading," someone said. "My children," another voice added, "I will not put them in danger." "There is a ranch about 5 miles back," a man suggested. "Saw it this afternoon, someone there might take her in." Faith wanted to protest, wanted to tell them she would be fine by morning, but her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. She heard her father arguing, heard the desperation in his voice, but she also heard the hard edge of fear in the other voices. Fear was a powerful thing on the frontier. Fear could make good people do terrible things. Before dawn, her father and 2 other men lifted her from the wagon. She tried to hold onto consciousness, tried to understand what was happening, but everything blurred together in a haze of heat and confusion. They placed her on a bedroll beneath a scraggly juniper tree, left her with a canteen of water and some dried meat wrapped in cloth. Her father kissed her forehead, and she felt wetness on his cheeks that was not from the morning dew. "I am sorry," he whispered. "God forgive me, I am sorry." Then they were gone, and Faith was alone with the rising sun and the vast emptiness of the Utah territory stretching out in all directions. She drifted in and out of fevered dreams, unable to tell what was real and what was not. Sometimes she thought she heard voices, but when she opened her eyes, there was nothing but red rock and blue sky. The water in the canteen became precious, each sip a reminder that she was still alive, still fighting. She did not want to die alone under a juniper tree, 22 years old with so much life still unlived. The sun was directly overhead when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. At first, she thought it was another fever dream, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. A horse nickered somewhere close by. Faith tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. "Well, I will be," a man's voice said, and then a shadow fell across her face, blocking out the brutal sunlight. Faith squinted up at the figure standing over her. He was tall, wearing a dusty hat and range clothes that had seen better days. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. A cowboy, she thought hazily. One of the ranch hands from the spread those families had mentioned. "Please," she managed to croak out. "Water." He knelt beside her immediately, lifting her head gently and holding his own canteen to her lips. The water was cool and sweet, and Faith drank greedily until he pulled it away. "Easy now," he said. "Not too much at once, or you will just bring it back up." His hand on the back of her head was surprisingly gentle for someone who looked so rough around the edges. He laid her back down carefully and felt her forehead with the back of his hand. "You are burning up something fierce," he said, more to himself than to her. "How long have you been out here?" "Since morning," Faith whispered. "I think hard to tell." The cowboy looked around, taking in the bedroll and the meager supplies her family had left. His jaw tightened and something dark flashed in his eyes. "They just left you here. Your people—" Faith wanted to defend her father, wanted to explain about the wagon train and the fear of contagion, but the effort seemed too great. She closed her eyes and felt herself starting to drift again. "Hey, stay with me," the cowboy said, his voice cutting through the fog. "What is your name?" "Faith," she murmured. "Faith Zimmerman." All right, Faith Zimmerman. My name is Kieran Ross and I am going to get you somewhere safe. Can you hold on a little longer? She wanted to say yes, wanted to show him she was strong, but the darkness was pulling at her again. She felt him lift her, felt the solid strength of his arms beneath her, and then she knew nothing more. When Faith next opened her eyes, she was no longer under the open sky. A rough wooden ceiling beamed above her and she lay on something soft. A bed, she realized. A real bed with blankets and a pillow. The room was small and plain, furnished with just the bed, a simple dresser, and a chair. Sunlight streamed through a single window, painting golden rectangles on the plank floor. She tried to sit up, but her body protested immediately. Every muscle ached and her head swam with dizziness. A door opened, and Kieran Ross stepped into the room carrying a basin of water and some clean cloths. "You are awake," he said, setting the basin down on the dresser. "That is a good sign. You have been drifting in and out for the better part of a day and a half. Where am I?" Faith asked, her voice still raspy. "My place," Kieran said. "The Diamond R Ranch. Well, what is left of it anyway. Been just me here since my father passed 2 years back." He wrung out one of the cloths in the water and approached the bed. Faith tensed slightly and he paused. "I need to cool you down," he explained. "The fever has not broken yet. I promise I will be respectful, but if we do not get your temperature down, you are going to be in real trouble." Faith nodded, too tired to argue. Kieran sat on the edge of the bed and gently pressed the cool cloth to her forehead. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. He worked methodically, cooling her face, her neck, her arms where they lay atop the blankets. His touch was impersonal but kind, the touch of someone who knew what needed to be done and did it without fuss. "How did you find me?" Faith asked after a while. "Was out checking on some cattle in the north pasture," Kieran said, rinsing the cloth and applying it again. "Saw you from a distance. At first I thought you might be dead already, truth be told, but I had to check." "Thank you," Faith said, and her voice broke slightly. "If you had not come along." "Do not think about that," Kieran said firmly. "You are here now and you are going to get better. I have seen plenty of fevers in my time. This one is bad, but you are young and strong. You will pull through." His confidence was reassuring, even if Faith was not entirely sure she shared it. But she found herself wanting to believe him, wanting to trust this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. Over the next few days, Faith existed in a haze of fever and fitful sleep. Kieran was a constant presence, always there when she woke, always ready with water or broth or a cool cloth. He changed her bedding when sweat soaked through it, speaking to her in a low, steady voice that became an anchor in the confusion of her illness. Sometimes he told her about the ranch, about the cattle and the land. Other times he read to her from a battered copy of Washington Irving that had belonged to his mother. His voice was deep and pleasant, and Faith found herself looking forward to those reading sessions even when she could barely follow the words. On the 4th day, the fever finally broke. Faith woke in the pre-dawn darkness feeling weak and wrung out but clear-headed for the first time in what felt like forever. She lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch coming to life outside. A rooster crowed, cattle lowed in the distance. Somewhere Kieran was moving around, his boots heavy on the floorboards. When he came in to check on her a little while later, he stopped in the doorway and smiled. It was the first time Faith had seen him really smile, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and almost boyish. "The fever broke," he said. "It was not a question." "I think so," Faith said. "I feel like I could sleep for a week, but my head is clear." "That is the best news I have heard in days," Kieran said, and Faith could hear the genuine relief in his voice. "Are you hungry?" "I bet you could use some real food." Faith's stomach rumbled at the mention of food, answering for her. Kieran laughed and disappeared into what Faith assumed was the kitchen. She heard the clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of something cooking. The smell of bacon and eggs drifted into the room, making her mouth water. When Kieran returned with a tray, Faith tried to sit up on her own. She managed it, though her arms shook with the effort. Kieran set the tray across her lap and pulled the chair over to sit beside the bed. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted, "but I can manage the basics." The food was simple but delicious, and Faith ate slowly, savoring every bite. She had not realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. Kieran watched her eat with satisfaction, and when she finally set down her fork, she felt more human than she had in days. "Thank you," Faith said, "for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you." Kieran waved a hand dismissively. "No need for that kind of talk. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Faith said quietly, "they would not have. My own people left me out there to die." A shadow crossed Kieran's face. "I have been thinking about that," he said. "About your wagon train, where were they headed?" "East," Faith said, "back to Missouri. We came out to Utah Territory 3 years ago, but it has been hard. My mother died the first winter and things just kept getting harder. My father decided to give up and go back. And they just left you when you got sick." "They were afraid," Faith said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Afraid the fever would spread to the children. I understand why they did it, even if it hurt." "Understanding something does not make it right," Kieran said, and there was an edge to his voice that suggested he had strong opinions on the matter. "Family should stick together, especially out here." Faith did not know what to say to that, so she changed the subject. "You said you have been running this ranch alone," Kieran nodded. "Since my father died. We used to have a couple of hands, but I had to let them go. Could not afford to keep paying them once the drought hit. Been managing with just me and stubbornness ever since." "That sounds difficult," Faith said. "It has its challenges," Kieran admitted, "but this land has been in my family for 15 years. My father built this place from nothing. I am not about to let it go without a fight." There was a fierce pride in his voice that Faith found herself admiring. This was a man who knew what he wanted and was willing to work for it. In that moment, she realized that Kieran Ross was not much older than she was, maybe 24 or 25. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that made him seem older, but there was still youth in his face when he smiled. "How old are you?" Faith asked, then immediately felt her face heat. "I am sorry, that was rude." Kieran did not seem offended. 24, he said. "You?" 22, Faith replied. "I will be 23 in November." "Well, happy early birthday," Kieran said with that easy smile again. "Getting nursed back to health on a failing ranch probably was not how you planned to spend your 22nd year." "Not exactly," Faith agreed, but found herself smiling back at him. "But I have had worse birthdays." Over the next week, Faith's strength slowly returned. Kieran helped her walk around the small ranch house, supporting her when her legs got tired. The house was simple but well built, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, the bedroom where Faith had been staying, and a small loft where Kieran had been sleeping since giving her his bed. "You have been sleeping in the loft?" Faith asked when she discovered this, horrified. "I could have managed up there. You should have your own bed." "You were barely conscious when I brought you here," Kieran pointed out. "No way I was carrying you up that ladder. And by the time you were stable, it seemed easier to just leave things as they were." "Still," Faith protested, "I feel terrible taking your bed." "The loft is fine," Kieran assured her. "I have slept in worse places." As Faith grew stronger, she began to help around the house. At first, it was small things, washing dishes or folding the laundry that Kieran had been neglecting. But gradually, she took on more tasks. She cooked meals, swept the floors, mended the tears in Kieran's work shirts. It felt good to be useful, to repay his kindness in some small way. Kieran seemed surprised by her help at first, but he quickly came to appreciate it. Faith noticed the way his face would light up when he came in from working the ranch to find dinner already prepared. She noticed how he would thank her for the little things, like finding his clothes washed and mended or the house tidied. "You do not have to do all this," he said one evening over dinner. "You are still recovering." "I feel fine," Faith insisted, "and I want to help. You saved my life, Kieran." "Washing some dishes is the least I can do." "You make it sound like I am keeping a tally," Kieran said. "I am not expecting payment for helping you." "I know," Faith said, "but I want to contribute. I do not like feeling useless." Kieran studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But if you start feeling tired or weak, you tell me." "Deal," Faith agreed. As the days turned into weeks, Faith found herself settling into a comfortable routine at the Diamond R Ranch. She would wake early and prepare breakfast while Kieran did the first chores of the day. They would eat together, talking about plans for the day or sharing stories about their pasts. Then Kieran would head out to work the ranch while Faith took care of the house and prepared meals. In the evenings, they would sit together in the main room, Kieran working on repairing tack or carving fence posts while Faith sewed or read. Sometimes they talked, and Faith learned more about the man who had saved her life. Kieran had been born in Texas but came to Utah Territory with his parents when he was 9 years old. His mother had died when he was 17 and his father just 2 years ago. He had grown up on this ranch, knew every acre of it like the back of his hand. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Faith asked one evening. Kieran was quiet for a moment, his hands still on the bridle he was repairing. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially after my father died, the house felt too big and too empty all at once." He glanced up at her, and something in his expression made Faith's heart skip. "It has been nice having someone to talk to again." "I have enjoyed it too," Faith said softly. "More than I expected to, honestly." "What do you mean?" Kieran asked. Faith set down her sewing and tried to find the right words. "When my family left me under that tree, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die alone in the desert, and that would be the end of Faith Zimmerman. But then you found me, and you brought me here, and you took care of me without asking for anything in return." She looked up and met his eyes. "You gave me a second chance at life, Kieran." "I will never forget that." "Faith," Kieran said, and his voice had gone rough around the edges. "I just did what anyone with a conscience would do." "No," Faith said firmly. "You did more than that. You opened your home to a stranger. You gave up your own bed. You sat by my side for days when I was too sick to know who you were. That is not just common decency, Kieran. That is kindness." Kieran looked at her for a long moment, and Faith saw something shift in his eyes, something warm and tender that made her breath catch in her throat. But then he looked away, back down at the bridle in his hands. "I am glad you are here," he said quietly. "That is all." Faith wanted to push, wanted to ask him what he was thinking, but something held her back. Instead, she picked up her sewing again and let the comfortable silence settle between them. October came, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the scrub brush around the ranch. Faith had been at the Diamond R for nearly a month, and she had not given much thought to what came next. She knew she could not stay forever, but the idea of leaving felt wrong somehow. This place had become home in a way that nowhere else ever had. One afternoon, while Kieran was out checking on the cattle, Faith decided to tackle the mess that was his father's old office. It was a small room off the main living area, filled with papers and ledgers and maps of the ranch. She spent hours sorting through everything, organizing the important documents and throwing away the clutter. When Kieran came home that evening, he found her sitting on the floor surrounded by papers, her hair tied back and a smudge of dust on her cheek. "What is all this?" he asked, looking around at the organized chaos. "I found your father's records," Faith said. "Kieran, have you looked at these recently?" "Not really," Kieran admitted. "I know how to run the ranch, but the bookkeeping was never my strong suit." "You are in debt," Faith said gently. "More than I think you realize." Kieran's face darkened. "I know I owe some money to the bank in Monticello, but I have been making payments." "Not enough," Faith said. She held up a ledger. "According to this, you are 3 months behind. And that is not counting what you owe the feed store or the blacksmith." Kieran sat down heavily on a chair, looking suddenly defeated. "I know things have been tight, but I thought I had more time." Faith got up and moved to sit beside him. "We can figure this out," she said. "We just need a plan." Kieran looked at her, surprise clear on his face. Faith felt her cheeks warm, but she did not back down. "Yes, if you want my help, that is." Kieran reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I would like that very much." They spent the rest of the evening going over the ranch's finances, and the picture that emerged was not good. Kieran had been surviving on hope and hard work, but hope did not pay bills. The ranch needed an influx of cash, and soon, or the bank would foreclose. "What if you sold some of the cattle?" Faith suggested. "Thought about that," Kieran said. "But the market is terrible right now. I would barely get enough to cover 1 month's debt, and then I would have fewer cattle to work with going forward." "What about taking on some extra work?" "Is there anything in town that might pay?" Kieran shook his head. Everyone in Monticello is struggling. There is not much work to be had." They sat in discouraged silence for a while, then Faith had an idea. "What about horses?" "Horses?" Kieran looked puzzled. "I noticed you have several wild horses on your property," Faith said. "I have seen them from the window. What if you broke and trained them? Trained horses sell for good money, do they not?" Kieran's eyes lit up. "They do, and I know how to break horses. My father taught me when I was young." He stood up, suddenly energized. "Faith, that might actually work. If I could train and sell even 3 or 4 horses, that could give us enough breathing room to get caught up on the debts." "Then that is what we will do," Faith said, caught up in his enthusiasm. Kieran said again, and this time he was smiling. "I like the sound of that." The next morning, Kieran set out to catch one of the wild horses. Faith watched from the porch as he worked, impressed by his skill with a rope and his patience with the skittish animals. By afternoon, he had a young chestnut mare in the breaking corral, and the real work began. Breaking horses was dangerous work, and Faith found herself holding her breath every time Kieran climbed into the saddle. But he knew what he was doing, and gradually, the mare began to respond to his guidance. Within a week, she was accepting the saddle and bridle without fuss, and Kieran could ride her around the corral without incident. Faith helped where she could, bringing water and encouragement, tending to the scrapes and bruises that came with the work. She noticed that Kieran seemed lighter somehow, more hopeful than he had been since she arrived. The work gave him purpose, and the possibility of saving the ranch gave him something to fight for. As October wore on, Kieran trained 3 more horses, each one responding to his firm but gentle handling. Faith watched him work with growing admiration. There was something beautiful about the way he moved with the animals, the trust he built with them through consistency and respect. One evening, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Kieran called Faith over to the corral. "Come here," he said, holding out his hand. "I want to show you something." Faith took his hand and let him lead her to where the chestnut mare stood calmly. "She is beautiful," Faith said. "She is yours," Kieran replied. Faith looked at him in shock. "What? If you want her," Kieran said. "I figured if you are going to stay out here, you should have your own horse. This one has the sweetest temperament of any I have ever worked with. She will take good care of you." "Kieran, I cannot," Faith protested. "You need to sell her." "I have 3 others," Kieran said. "That should be enough to get us caught up on the debts. This one is for you." He looked at her seriously. "That is, if you are planning to stay." Faith's heart hammered in her chest. "Do you want me to stay?" "Yes," Kieran said simply. "I do, very much." "Then I will stay," Faith said, and the smile that broke across Kieran's face was brighter than the sunset behind him. He took her hand and led her into the corral, showing her how to approach the mare, how to pet her gently on the neck. The horse nuzzled Faith's shoulder, and Faith laughed with delight. "What should I name her?" Faith asked. "That is up to you," Kieran said. "She is your horse." Faith thought for a moment, then smiled. "Hope," she said. "I will call her Hope." "That is a good name," Kieran said softly, and when Faith looked at him, she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. They stood there in the corral as the sun sank lower, their hands still clasped together, the mare standing peacefully beside them. Faith felt something shift between them in that moment, something that had been building for weeks finally breaking through to the surface. "Faith," Kieran said, and his voice was low and serious. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Faith asked, though she thought she might already know. "When I found you under that juniper tree, I thought I was just doing the right thing," Kieran said. "But these past weeks with you here, they have been the happiest I can remember since my father died. You have made this house feel like a home again. You have given me hope when I was ready to give up on everything." He squeezed her hand gently. "What I am trying to say is, I have feelings for you, real feelings, and I needed you to know that." Faith felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I have feelings for you too," she said. "I think I have for a while now, but I was not sure if you felt the same." Kieran reached up and cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I feel the same," he said, "more than I can put into words." Then he was kissing her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as Faith leaned into him. It felt right in a way that nothing else in her life ever had. This man who had saved her, who had cared for her, who had shown her kindness when the world had been cruel, was the man she wanted to be with. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said again. "Not just for now. Stay with me, be my partner in all of this." "Yes," Faith said without hesitation. "Yes, I will stay." They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other as the stars began to appear overhead. The mare nickered softly beside them, and from somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. It was wild and beautiful and perfect, and Faith felt like she had finally found where she belonged. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and happiness. Kieran took the 3 trained horses to Monticello and sold them for a good price, enough to get caught up on the most pressing debts and buy some time with the bank. He came home with supplies and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What is that?" Faith asked as he came through the door. "Open it and see," Kieran said, handing it to her with a shy smile. Faith unwrapped the package carefully and gasped. Inside was a length of beautiful blue fabric, soft and fine, the color of a summer sky. "Kieran, this is lovely, but it must have cost a fortune." "Not a fortune," Kieran said. "But I wanted to get you something nice. You have been wearing the same 2 dresses since you got here, and I thought you might like something new." Faith held the fabric up to the light, admiring the way it shimmered. "I love it," she said. "Thank you." "There is more," Kieran said, and pulled out a smaller package. This one contained thread and buttons and lace trim. "I figured you would need these too if you were going to make a dress." Faith set everything down carefully and threw her arms around his neck, kissing him soundly. "You are wonderful," she said. "Do you know that?" "I am just trying to take care of what is mine," Kieran said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Yours, am I?" Faith teased. "If you want to be," Kieran said, suddenly serious. "Faith, I know we have not been together long, but I know what I want. I want you here with me as my wife. I want to build a life together, make this ranch work together, maybe have a family someday." He took a deep breath. "I am not a rich man, and this life will not be easy. But I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy. Will you marry me?" Faith felt joy bubble up inside her chest, so strong it almost hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Kieran let out a whoop of happiness and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, long and deep and full of promise. "We will have to go into Monticello to see the preacher," Kieran said, "and I need to get you a proper ring." "I do not need anything fancy," Faith said. "I just need you." "Even so," Kieran said. "I want to do this right." They rode into Monticello the following week, Faith on Hope and Kieran on his sturdy bay gelding. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings. But it had a preacher, and that was what mattered. Reverend Miller was a kindly older man who seemed delighted to hear about their upcoming marriage. "It does my heart good to see young people starting their lives together," he said. "Especially out here where life can be so hard. When would you like to have the ceremony?" "As soon as possible," Kieran said, and Faith nodded her agreement. "How about next Saturday?" the Reverend suggested. "That will give you time to prepare and spread the word to any friends you might want to invite." Kieran and Faith looked at each other. "We do not have many friends," Kieran admitted. "It will just be us." "Then us will be enough," the Reverend said warmly. "Come Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock and we will make you husband and wife." After leaving the church, Kieran took Faith to the general store, the owner, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, fussed over Faith when she heard about the wedding. "What a lovely story," she said. "And you say you nursed her back to health. That is true love right there." She turned to Faith. "You hold on to this one, dear. Good men are hard to find." "I intend to," Faith said, smiling at Kieran. Kieran bought Faith a simple gold band that had belonged to Mrs. Patterson's mother. It was not fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, and it fit Faith's finger perfectly. He also insisted on buying her new boots and a warm coat for the coming winter. "You are spending too much," Faith protested. "Nothing is too much for my bride," Kieran said firmly. On the ride back to the ranch, Faith found herself looking at the ring on her finger, still hardly able to believe this was real. 2 months ago, she had been left to die in the desert. Now she was engaged to a good man and about to start a new life. It felt like a miracle. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked, riding alongside her. How much my life has changed, Faith said. How grateful I am that you found me. I think I was the lucky one, Kieran said. You saved me too, you know, just in a different way. The week leading up to the wedding was busy with preparations. Faith worked on her dress, staying up late by candlelight to get every stitch just right. Kieran cleaned and organized the house, wanting everything to be perfect for when they returned as husband and wife. He also built a new piece of furniture, though he would not let Faith see what it was, insisting it was a surprise. On Friday evening, the night before the wedding, they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the red rocks in the distance. Are you nervous? Kieran asked. No, Faith said honestly. Are you? Not about marrying you, Kieran said. That is the easiest decision I have ever made. But I am nervous about being a good husband, about giving you the life you deserve. Faith took his hand. You already are, she said. You have shown me more kindness and love in the past 2 months than I knew existed in the world. That is all I need. I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy, Kieran said. That is a promise. Then I promise the same to you, Faith said. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, each lost in their own thoughts about the future. Faith thought about the family she had lost, about the father and sister who had left her behind. Part of her still hurt from that abandonment, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we are born into. Kieran had chosen her and she had chosen him, and that was enough. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the sky a perfect blue without a cloud in sight. Faith woke early and spent the morning getting ready, putting on her new dress and fixing her hair as best she could without a mirror. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, Kieran was waiting in his best clothes, his hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven. You look beautiful, he said, his voice awed. You look very handsome yourself, Faith replied, taking in the sight of him in his pressed shirt and vest. They rode to Monticello together, their horses walking side by side. The journey that had taken them hours the first time seemed to pass in minutes. Before Faith knew it, they were standing in the small church, facing Reverend Miller as he read the marriage ceremony. The words washed over Faith like a benediction. She promised to love and honor Kieran, to stand by him in good times and bad, in sickness and in health. When it came time for Kieran to say his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving her face. With this ring I thee wed, Kieran said, sliding the gold band onto her finger. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Miller said with a smile. Kieran kissed her sweetly, respectfully, mindful that they were in a church. But the love in that kiss was undeniable, and when they pulled apart, Faith saw that there were tears in his eyes. I love you, he said softly. I love you too, Faith replied. They signed the marriage certificate, and just like that, Faith Zimmerman became Faith Ross. It felt right, felt like the missing piece of herself had finally clicked into place. The ride back to the ranch was full of laughter and joy. They stopped halfway home to rest the horses, and Kieran pulled Faith close, kissing her properly now that they were alone. My wife, he said, as if testing out the word. My husband, Faith replied, and they both smiled. When they reached the ranch, Kieran insisted on carrying Faith over the threshold, even though she protested that she was perfectly capable of walking. It is tradition, he said. And I intend to honor every tradition when it comes to you. Once inside, he finally showed her his surprise. He had built a new bookshelf for the main room and filled it with books he had ordered from the catalog at the general store. I know you like to read, Kieran said. And I thought it would be nice to have a collection we could add to over the years. Faith was touched beyond words. She ran her fingers over the spines of the books, recognizing some titles and discovering new ones. This is wonderful, she said. Thank you. Anything for you, Kieran said. That night, they celebrated their marriage in the privacy of their home, and Faith discovered new depths to the love they shared. Kieran was gentle and patient, making sure she felt cherished and safe. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, talking about their dreams for the future. I want to expand the herd, Kieran said. Build the Diamond R back up to what it was when my father first started it. We will, Faith said confidently. Together. And maybe someday, if we are blessed, fill this house with children, Kieran added. I would like that, Faith said, resting her head on his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. The first year of their marriage was hard work but full of happiness. They fell into an easy partnership, each supporting the other through the challenges that came with ranch life. When winter came, bringing snow and bitter cold, they kept each other warm. When spring arrived with new calves and endless work, they tackled it together. Faith proved to be a natural with the cattle, and Kieran taught her everything he knew about ranching. She learned to ride fence lines, to doctor sick animals, to read the weather and the land. In turn, she taught him how to keep proper books and plan for the future. Together, they were stronger than either had been alone. The ranch began to thrive under their joint stewardship. They paid off the debts one by one and even began to save a little money for improvements. Kieran trained more horses, building a reputation in Monticello for quality stock. Faith started a small vegetable garden which grew larger each year, and they were able to sell the surplus produce in town. As Faith's 23rd birthday approached in November, Kieran surprised her with a trip to the larger town of Blanding, about 20 miles away. They spent 2 nights at a hotel, a luxury they could now afford, and Kieran bought her a beautiful locket to mark the occasion. "For our first year together," he said, fastening it around her neck. Inside the locket were 2 miniature portraits, one of Kieran and one of Faith, that an artist in Blanding had painted from life. Faith treasured it more than anything she owned. By the following spring, Faith had joyful news to share. She had been feeling strange for weeks, tired and nauseated in the mornings, and she had a suspicion about what it might mean. When she finally rode into Monticello to see the doctor, he confirmed what she already knew in her heart. "You are expecting a baby, Mrs. Ross," Dr. Hansen said, "probably due sometime in early October." Faith rode home in a daze of happiness, wondering how to tell Kieran. In the end, she simply blurted it out as soon as he came in from the evening chores. "I am going to have a baby," she said. Kieran froze in the doorway, then let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the horses in the barn. He picked Faith up and spun her around, then set her down quickly, suddenly worried. "Are you all right? Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" he asked, his face full of concern. Faith laughed. "I am fine. Pregnant women do not break just from standing, Kieran." "I know, he ran a hand through his hair, looking flustered and delighted at the same time. "We are going to have a baby. Faith, we are going to be parents." "We are," Faith said, taking his hands. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Kieran said. "I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." Over the next months, Kieran treated Faith like she was made of glass, constantly worried that she was doing too much or working too hard. Faith found it sweet but exasperating. "I am pregnant, not dying," she reminded him when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I need to stay active." "I just want to take care of you," Kieran said. "You do take care of me," Faith assured him, "but you have to let me live my life too." They compromised, with Faith agreeing to let Kieran handle the heavier chores while she focused on the lighter work around the ranch. As her belly grew, Kieran would often put his hand on it, feeling for the baby's movements. The first time he felt a kick, his face lit up with such wonder that Faith felt tears spring to her eyes. "That is our child," he said in amazement. "Right there, moving around, getting ready to join us," Faith said. Kieran leaned down and spoke to her belly. "We cannot wait to meet you, little one." As October approached, Faith grew increasingly uncomfortable but also increasingly excited. Kieran had purchased a beautiful carved cradle from a craftsman in Blanding, and Faith had sewn tiny clothes and blankets. Everything was ready for their baby's arrival. The labor started on a cool October morning, 2 years to the day since Kieran had found Faith under the juniper tree. Faith had insisted they mark the anniversary every year, calling it her 2nd birthday. Now, it seemed fitting that their child might share that date. Kieran rode hard to Monticello to fetch Dr. Hansen while Faith waited at the ranch with Mrs. Patterson, who had become a friend over the past year. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the night, but Faith was strong and Kieran never left her side once he returned with the doctor. "You can do this," he told her, holding her hand through the contractions. "You are the strongest person I know." Just after midnight, their son was born, a healthy baby boy with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. Kieran cried when Dr. Hansen placed the baby in his arms, looking down at the tiny face with absolute devotion. "He is perfect," Kieran said, his voice thick with emotion. "Faith, he is perfect. What should we name him?" Faith asked, exhausted but happy. They had discussed names for months but had not been able to decide. Now, looking at their son, Kieran spoke without hesitation. "Thomas," he said, "after your father. Whatever he did, he gave me you, and I will always be grateful for that." Faith felt tears roll down her cheeks. She had not seen her father or sister since they left her in the desert 2 years ago. She did not know if they ever thought about her or if they felt guilt for what they had done. But Kieran was right. Whatever had happened, it had led her to this moment, to this man, to this family. "Thomas Ross," she said. "I love it. The first months with a baby were exhausting but wonderful. Thomas was a good baby, generally happy and healthy, and he thrived under their care." Kieran proved to be a devoted father, waking in the night to help with feedings and singing ridiculous songs to make Thomas smile. "I never knew I could love something this much," Kieran said one evening, holding his son while Faith prepared dinner. "It is almost frightening how much I love him." "I know what you mean," Faith said. "I look at him and I cannot imagine my life without him, without both of you." As Thomas grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Kieran hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, allowing him more time with his family. Faith found that she loved being a mother, loved watching Thomas discover the world around him. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, and the house rang with his laughter and Kieran's playful growls as he chased the boy around. When Thomas was 2 years old, Faith became pregnant again. This time she was less anxious about the process, knowing what to expect. Their second son was born in the spring of Faith's 26th year, and they named him Daniel, after Kieran's father. Life fell into a comfortable pattern over the next few years. The ranch was doing well, better than it had in years. Kieran's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from all over the territory to buy his stock. Faith managed the household and raised their boys, who were growing strong and healthy under the Utah sun. When Thomas was 5 and Daniel was 3, Faith discovered she was pregnant for a third time. This time, the doctor told them it might be a girl, and Kieran was beside himself with excitement. "A little girl," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "A daughter." Faith was equally thrilled but tried to remind him that the doctor could be wrong. "We will love the baby either way," she said. "Of course," Kieran agreed. "But the idea of a little girl, with your eyes and your smile, it is almost too good to believe." Their daughter arrived in December, just before Christmas, and she was indeed perfect. They named her Sarah after Kieran's mother, and she had Faith's green eyes and Kieran's dark hair. The boys were fascinated by their baby sister, wanting to hold her and help take care of her. "Gentle Thomas," Faith reminded her eldest as he cradled Sarah with surprising tenderness. "She is still very small." "I will always protect her," Thomas declared seriously, and Faith and Kieran exchanged a smile over his head. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The Diamond R Ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the area. Kieran and Faith built a new, larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original cabin standing as a reminder of where they had started. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran took Faith back to the spot where he had found her under the juniper tree. The tree was still there, gnarled and tough, surviving against all odds in the harsh landscape. "I think about that day sometimes," Kieran said, standing with his arm around Faith's waist. "How easily I could have ridden past, how you could have died before I got there." "But you did not ride past," Faith said. "You stopped, you saved me." "We saved each other," Kieran corrected. "I was just surviving before you came. You taught me how to live again." Faith leaned into him, looking at the tree that had sheltered her in her darkest moment. "Do you ever wonder what happened to my family, if they made it to Missouri safely?" "Sometimes," Kieran admitted. "Do you?" "I used to," Faith said. "I was angry for a long time, but now I mostly just feel grateful. If they had not left me, I never would have found you. I never would have this life." "Do you have regrets?" Kieran asked quietly. Faith turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." They stood there for a while longer, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Then they rode home together, back to their children and their ranch and the life they had built from nothing. Thomas grew into a strong, responsible young man who took naturally to ranching. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful, but equally capable. Sarah was spirited and fearless, able to ride before she could barely walk, and she kept her older brothers on their toes. The three of them were close, united in the way that siblings who grow up in relative isolation often are. As Faith and Kieran grew older, they watched their children grow with pride and satisfaction. They had built something lasting, not just in the ranch itself, but in the family they had created. The Diamond R would endure long after they were gone, passed down through generations. On Faith's 40th birthday, Kieran gave her a journal bound in soft leather. "For your memories," he said. "I thought you might want to write down our story, for the children and their children someday." Faith opened the journal to the first page and saw that Kieran had already written something there in his careful handwriting. "This is the story of Faith and Kieran Ross, who found each other in the wilderness and built a life worth living." "It is perfect," Faith said, kissing him. "Thank you." She spent the next several months writing down everything she could remember, how it felt to wake up under that juniper tree, more dead than alive. The first time she saw Kieran's face, the way he had cared for her with such patience and gentleness. Their courtship, their wedding, the birth of each of their children. She filled page after page with their story, wanting to preserve every detail. When Thomas was 20, he announced that he wanted to marry a girl from Blanding named Elizabeth. She was sweet and kind, and Faith liked her immediately. The wedding was held at the ranch with all their friends and neighbors in attendance. It was a far cry from the simple ceremony Faith and Kieran had shared all those years ago, but it was beautiful in its own way. Standing beside Kieran, watching their son marry the woman he loved, Faith felt a sense of completion. The family she had lost all those years ago had been replaced by something even stronger. She had children who loved her, grandchildren on the way, and a man beside her who had proven his devotion every single day for more than 20 years. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran whispered to her during the ceremony. "How blessed I am," Faith whispered back. "How grateful I am for every moment we have had together." Kieran squeezed her hand. "We are not done yet," he said with a smile. "We have a lot more moments to come," and they did. Over the next years, Thomas and Elizabeth gave them 4 grandchildren. Daniel married a schoolteacher named Catherine, and they had 3 children of their own. Sarah, spirited as ever, fell in love with a young doctor from Blanding, and they had 2 daughters who looked exactly like their grandmother. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, with Daniel handling the business side of things. Kieran and Faith slowly stepped back from the day-to-day work, content to watch the next generation take over. They spent their days together, sitting on the porch of the big house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played years before. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Kieran took Faith back to the juniper tree one last time. They were both older now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with years of sun and wind. But when Kieran looked at Faith, he still saw the beautiful young woman he had found all those years ago. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you from the moment I found you, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Faith said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me life, Kieran, not just by saving me, but by loving me, by building this beautiful life with me." They stood under the tree, holding each other as the sun set over the land they had made their own. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to everything they had built together. As darkness fell, they rode home one last time, back to the house full of light and laughter and family. Their children and grandchildren were there, gathered for the anniversary celebration. The table was laden with food, and the house rang with voices and joy. Faith looked around at all of it, at the family they had created, at the legacy they were leaving behind, and felt a peace settle over her. She had been abandoned and left to die, but she had survived. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person, and from that love had grown something beautiful and lasting. Kieran caught her eye from across the room and smiled, and Faith smiled back. After 30 years, he still made her heart flutter. After 30 years, she still could not imagine her life without him. "Thank you," she mouthed to him. "For what?" he mouthed back. "For everything," Faith replied. As the evening wore on and the celebrations continued around them, Faith and Kieran slipped out onto the porch to watch the stars come out. They sat together in the swing that Kieran had built years ago, moving gently back and forth in the cool evening air. "Do you remember that first night?" Kieran asked. "When you were so sick and I did not know if you would make it." "I remember pieces of it," Faith said. "Mostly I remember your voice. You kept talking to me, telling me to hold on." "I could not let you go," Kieran said. "Even then, before I knew you were meant to be mine." "Fate brought us together," Faith said. "Or maybe just a stubborn cowboy who could not ride past someone in need," Kieran said with a chuckle. "Either way," Faith said, "I am grateful for it, for all of it, even the hard parts." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their family inside the house. After a while, Thomas came out to find them. "We are about to cut the cake," he said. "You two should come in." "We will be right there," Kieran said. Thomas nodded and went back inside. Faith and Kieran sat for another moment, savoring the peace of the evening. "Ready?" Kieran asked, standing and offering Faith his hand. "Always," Faith said, taking it. They walked back into the house together, hand in hand, the way they had walked through life together for 30 years. The room erupted in cheers when they entered, and their grandchildren swarmed them, demanding hugs and attention. Faith looked around at all of it, at the life she had built from the ashes of abandonment, and knew that she would not change a single thing. Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow had led her here, to this place, to this family, to this man who had saved her life and then made it worth living. As the cake was cut and distributed, as toasts were made and stories were told, Faith leaned into Kieran's side and felt his arm come around her shoulders. They had weathered storms together, celebrated triumphs together, raised a family together. They had built something that would last long after they were gone. "I love you," Kieran whispered in her ear. "I love you too," Faith whispered back. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, Faith Zimmerman Ross knew that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The woman who had been left to die in the desert had not just survived, she had thrived. She had found love, built a legacy, and created a future that stretched out bright and shining before them all. The night grew late, but no one wanted the celebration to end. The children told stories about growing up on the ranch, and the grandchildren performed a play they had prepared. Kieran was persuaded to play his old fiddle, and soon everyone was dancing in the living room, laughing and spinning to the music. Faith danced with Kieran, with her sons, with her grandchildren. She danced until her feet hurt and her face ached from smiling. And when she finally sat down to rest, she felt Kieran sit beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "Tired?" he asked. "Wonderfully so," Faith said. They watched their family together, taking in every detail, savoring every moment. This was what life was meant to be, Faith thought. Not perfect, not without pain or struggle, but full of love and connection and purpose. As the evening wound down and families began preparing to leave or retire to their rooms, Faith and Kieran made their way to their own bedroom. It was the same room where Faith had recovered all those years ago, though it had been expanded and improved over time. The bed was still in the same place, and Faith could still remember what it felt like to wake up in it that first time, confused and weak but safe. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked as they got ready for bed. "About the first time I woke up in this room," Faith said. "How scared I was, how uncertain about everything, and then you walked in and somehow I knew everything was going to be all right." "I was terrified," Kieran admitted. "I had no idea what I was doing, how to take care of someone that sick. I was just making it up as I went along." "You did perfectly," Faith said, going to him and wrapping her arms around his waist. "You saved my life." "And you saved mine," Kieran said, pulling her close. "In every way that matters." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet darkness. Outside, the ranch was settling down for the night. The cattle were quiet in their pastures. The horses were dozing in the barn, the children and grandchildren were tucked into their beds. Everything was peaceful, everything was right. Faith and Kieran climbed into bed together, fitting together the way they had for 30 years. Kieran's arm came around Faith automatically, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," Faith said softly. "For what?" Kieran asked. "For turning around," Faith said. "For not leaving me there to die, for choosing me every single day since then." "That was the easiest choice I ever made," Kieran said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Choosing you, loving you, building this life with you. None of it was hard, Faith. It was all exactly what I was meant to do." Faith felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears. After 30 years, Kieran could still make her cry with his words, still make her feel cherished and loved. "I would do it all again," Faith said. "Every moment, every challenge, I would do it all again just to end up here with you." "Me too," Kieran said softly. "Me too." They drifted off to sleep together, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over them that night so long ago when a cowboy found a dying woman under a juniper tree and decided to save her. The same stars that had witnessed their love grow and flourish over 30 years. And somewhere out there in the darkness, that juniper tree still stood, a silent testament to where their story had begun. It stood through wind and rain and sun, enduring the way Faith and Kieran's love had endured, rooted deep and strong in the harsh but beautiful landscape of the Utah Territory. In the morning, Faith and Kieran would wake to find their house full of family again, ready for another day of celebration. There would be more food, more stories, more laughter. But for now, they slept peacefully. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The Diamond R Ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations. But the real legacy was not the land or the cattle or the horses. The real legacy was the love that had started it all, the decision one man made to stop and help a dying woman, the choice two people made to build a life together despite everything that had tried to keep them apart. Faith Zimmerman had been left to die in the desert, abandoned by the people who should have protected her. But Kieran Ross had turned around, had nursed her back to health, had given her a reason to live and something worth living for. Together, they had created something that would last forever, a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardship or the struggle, not the pain or the fear, but the love that had conquered it all. The love that had turned abandonment into destiny, that had transformed two lonely people into a family, that had built a legacy that would endure long after the stars overhead had faded from the sky. This was their story. This was their life. And it was more beautiful than either of them could have ever imagined on that day so long ago, when fate and a stubborn cowboy had conspired to bring them together. The end of one story, but really just the beginning of a legacy that would echo through time, carried forward by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would come after. The story of Faith and Kieran Ross, who found each other in the wilderness and built something that would last forever.